Hello my fellow artists! Today I'm going to bring you along the painting of this floral pattern. So this is not really a flower composition because I thought of creating something really for beginners where we don't focus really on composition but on creating beautiful flowers. We are going to play a lot with wet on wet and wet on dry. My name is Luisa and this is the Lulu Blue Studio. Let's start painting together. In this video, I want to show you how you can have fun creating a simple pattern of flowers. I'm using my flat brush and I'm mixing a little bit of transparent orange and scarlet red to create a mixture of colors that is going to be the leading color of my main flowers. I'm using mainly the side of this brush to start to create the petals of this first flower, and I also remember to keep some white spaces that are going to help me to define better and in a more loose style way the petals of these flowers. I keep in mind to connect all of the petals to the same center that I'm going to create in a second moment, and I started to have fun by adding a little bit of scarlet red into the wet petals of the first layer that I have created. Allowing this red to really mix and blend onto the first layer of orange paint that I've created creates beautiful mixtures of colors when the paint is going to be completely dry. This is, in my opinion, one of the best things of watercolor painting, which means mixing colors together on the paper and seeing with the water what final effects you will achieve. And so I really encourage you to try on these main flowers to mix together different colors and see what the final result is going to be. When you are creating a pattern like this one, you don't necessarily need to think about the rules of flower composition that we have spoken about in other videos. With a floral pattern like this one, you can really lay onto the paper the flowers, the main flowers, wherever you prefer, and you can add then leaves and other flowers wherever you feel like adding these other elements, thinking about the white spaces and which final effects you want to achieve. In this case, I've created these three major flowers in orange and red color, and now I'm adding with a round brush in size 6 the yellow center with a little bit of lemon yellow. So one tip that I wanted to highlight at this point is to remember when you create flowers in this style to leave some white spaces and also to create petals of different size and shapes in order to create a little bit of movement and create these flowers in a real loose style. And now I'm taking my round brush from Princeton and I mix a little bit of Cobalt Green Dark with a little bit of red just to connect the red of the flowers with the green color that I want to create. And I add a little bit of Azomethine Green Yellow, which is a sort of bright green that goes towards the yellow color, and I start to create some stems that connect to these flowers. I just use the very fine tip of this brush, and then with a flat brush I start to create leaves mixing the same colors that I've used for the stems. When I created this type of leaves, I mainly take advantage of the side of this flat brush, and I really press this flat brush onto the paper in order to create the thickest and the widest part of the leaf. When I wanted to create instead parts that are much thinner, I just remove some of the pressure from this flat brush and I use the side to create very fine brush strokes. Creating a pattern like this one really allows you to approach this type of composition in a different way. You don't have really to think how to place onto the paper the main elements and the secondary elements and how to handle the white spaces. You can really lay onto the paper whatever you feel like and in the space that you feel like. Also, with this type of pattern, you can take advantage of your brushes and really test with your brushes different brush strokes and different pressures that you can give to your brushes. And so I really think that creating patterns of this type really help you even to discover different techniques with the supplies that you already have. With a round brush in size 6, my same brush that I used for the center of these yellow flowers, I started to create some elongated brown leaves. I am mixing mainly some burnt umber and some yellow ochre, and I want this mixture to be quite thick, so I'm using a little bit of water but a big amount of pigment to create these leaves. To create these leaves, I'm mainly adding some pressure onto the paper and then removing the pressure after I've created the thickest part of the leaf. If you like this video, remember to press like down below, and if you want to support me with the creation of other videos in this style, please subscribe to this channel, because it really helps me to create this free content for you to watch. Also, if you are a beginner artist and you would like to improve your skills in painting watercolor flowers, remember you can always download for free the beginner's guide to watercolor flower painting by clicking on the link in the description down below. The Beginner's Guide to Watercolor Flower Painting is an ebook that I wrote for all of the beginners, where I highlight all of the best supplies, but also techniques you should practice, and I also show you how to start to paint easy flowers. The Beginner's Guide to Watercolor Flower Painting is really a great companion to these YouTube videos where I show you how to paint watercolor flowers. So, if you haven't downloaded yet your free guide, click on the link in the description down below. Back to our painting, I'm using the same technique I've described before to keep adding these long brown leaves all over the page. I'm just giving the direction to these leaves where I see that there are white spaces onto the page and where I think the flow will suit more the composition that I've created so far. I'm keeping in mind to remove a part of the pigment in the cup of water to have different color values that I can play with to create all of these leaves in this flower composition. And at this point, with the same brush, I started to add a few red berries, and so with just the tip of this brush, I take a little bit of Scarlet Red and I create some circular shapes next to these brown leaves that I've created. When you are creating these berries, remember to give them different sizes, and also if you want, you can keep some white spaces where the paper underneath is going to show. The process of painting a floral pattern like this one, where you can just focus on shapes, simple shapes if you prefer, and just a few colors to mix together, is really something that is relaxing and can really help you to improve your technique, because you can practice wet and wet, but also wet on dry, and you can also discover, for example, which different mixtures, for example, of colors you can create to obtain something that is unusual for you. So I really encourage you to try to create patterns in this style, not thinking too much about a composition, but just relaxing and having fun. At this point, with the tip of this brush and with a little bit of burnt umber, I'm just connecting the berries to the brown leaves. And at this point I take some green, this is Cobalt Green Dark, and I saw that there are some white spaces in the upper and lower part of the page, and so I've decided to create a couple of more stems where I will create some yellow flowers using my flat brush. I use a similar approach, so I mix some lemon yellow on my color palette, and using the side of this flat brush, I created some yellow flowers really in the upper and lower part of this page. I like to use this bright yellow color because it is something that I haven't used for the other flowers in the composition so far, and so it really brings a kick of color that connects also with the center of the orange flowers that I've created in first place. While the yellow is still wet, I'm adding through the wet on wet technique some yellow ochre, and I define some petals. At this point, I take my round brush in size 6 from Silver Black Velvet. This is a very fine brush and very soft, and I like to use it when I want to create layers. In this case, I mix a little bit of ochre and brown from my gouache palette, and I start to create layers, especially on the brown leaves that I've created in watercolor. I'm using gouache in this case because gouache is a little bit more opaque than watercolor, and I really want these layers to be quite important in this flower composition, and so I'm using a mixture of ochre and brown. Using the tip of this round brush allows me to really create some fine lines, sort of veins of these leaves. If you don't have gouache available, you can create exactly the same with watercolors. Remember not to use a lot of water, but to create these leaves and the veins on these leaves with a high amount of pigment. I am adding these fine veins in brown color that is a similar color to the base of these leaves, but I remind you that you can also add this sort of filaments, these veins, in completely different colors, especially if you have some gouache available. Gouache is much more opaque than the watercolor that you have used for the base of these leaves, and you can add on top really any color that will highlight and pop from the base of these leaves. At this point, with the same brush and with a little bit of black gouache, I am adding the center to these yellow flowers. To create the center of these flowers, I'm just tapping the paper with the tip of this brush, and I'm creating some little dots. And then I connect these dots to the center of the flowers, creating some fine lines. After I rinse my brush, I take a little bit of yellow gouache and I refine the center of these flowers. This because the watercolor yellow has a little bit faded into the orange petals of these flowers because they were still wet and they dragged into the petals themselves the yellow center that I've created. And at this point, with this same brush, I take some watercolor orange, mainly a mixture of orange with a little bit of red, and I start to create some layers on the petals of the main flowers. You can skip this part if you just like the petals of your flowers to be created just with wet on wet technique. But now I want to show you how you can add a few details through wet on dry. I use the fine tip of this brush when I want to create some lines that are very fine, but I use instead the belly and I add more pressure onto the petals when I want to create some elements onto the petals that are more defined. Also in this case, when you're adding layers on your petals through the wet on dry technique, you can either use the same colors that you have used for the base of your petals, of your flowers, or you can decide to add these layers using very different colors compared to the base. For example, on these orange flowers, you could add layers in purple or dark blue, depending on the mood you have or what you feel like doing. Remember that you don't have to stick to the same colors as the base of your petals. As a final touch at this point, I'm adding some black details to the center of these flowers that are mainly some little dots created with some black gouache. I looked at the whole composition and I really liked what I created, but I thought to add a few brighter details onto the leaves. And so I picked my beloved color, the Azomethine green yellow, and I started to add through the wet on dry technique a few details onto the leaves as well. I really love this green color because it's such a bright one that has this yellow touch that really helps to highlight the dark leaves when you create them in a composition like this one. Basically, with these details that I'm adding, I'm defining a little bit better the shape of these green leaves that I've created in first place. And that's everything for today. I really hope you enjoyed painting with me. Let me know in the comments below. See you in the next video. Bye!